Hey y'all! So today I'm going to be doing a video that is inspired by a video that Lindsay Ray did called Bookish Buzzwords. I will leave a link down in the description to her video, but basically I'm going to be talking about like bookish buzzwords as well as things that might turn me off from a book. So basically my book turn-ons and turn-offs. For book turn-ons, these are things that when I hear that a book has this specific aspect or is described in this specific way, it makes me want to pick up this book and read it. And for book turn-offs, I took this as if I am interested in a book and I hear that a book has one of these things, then it might slightly turn me off from reading it. These are not necessarily things where if I hear about a book like this, I'm automatically like, no, I don't want to read it. However, if I hear that a book that I'm interested in has one of these things, it might dissuade me from actually picking it up. And I ended up having significantly more book turn-ons than turn-offs. I tried to make it fairly equal, but I mean, then I'd just be making up book turn-offs, and so I just decided to leave it how it was. So I'm going to start with my book turn-ons and then go into my book turn-offs. One of my biggest book turn-ons is when a book is a fantasy dystopian. Those are my two favorite genres, and anytime that I hear of a book that has combined the two genres, I am just instantly really excited about it, and I want to read it so badly. One really great example of this is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon, which I'm currently in the middle of rereading. I was so excited when I heard the concept of this book because it's a mix of fantasy and dystopian, and then when I read it, I was so incredibly obsessed with it and impressed by it, and I loved it. And so yeah, fantasy dystopians are like my probably #1 book turn-on. Like anytime I hear about a fantasy dystopian book, I just want it immediately. Another of my biggest book turn-ons is if I hear someone say that a book has great world building. As I've said in other videos, I feel like world building is more important to me than it is to the average reader. Often things that some people call info dumping or find really boring are the parts of the book that I really, really love. For example, a lot of people thought that the beginning of Ready Player One was a little bit slow and there was some info dumping going on, but I thought it was so interesting. I just loved learning about this world that Ernest Cline has created. It was so interesting to me. And that is just one of many, many books where I absolutely loved the world building. Some other books that I obsessed over the world building in were like The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. A lot of people found that one really slow too. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. That one has some really great world building. Recently I read The Body Electric by Beth Revis, and I thought that that had some really great world building too. It's just, world building is super important to me. Another book turn-on for me is when I hear that there is a magic school in the book. Some people really love boarding school, but for me it's more specifically magic school. I like when it's a magic school that's also a boarding school a la Harry Potter, but like if I hear that there's magic school in a book, I will want to pick it up immediately. This also partially ties into the world building of the book because when you learn about the magic system in the book through magic school, you're also somewhat learning about the world that it takes place in, and I find that incredibly interesting. Another great book that I've read that includes magic school is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I loved this whole book, but the best parts for me were the parts where Quoth was in magic school. And technically, yes, it's not called magic in The Name of the Wind. I understand this, but I mean, it's basically a form of magic. Another really big turn-on for me is when I see that on Goodreads a book has 4 stars or more. Although I like to form my own opinions about books and other reviewers' opinions don't hold super big value for me, when I do see that a book has a lot of reviews and it has over 4 stars on Goodreads, that makes me sit there and say, oh, this must be a really good book. For example, both of the books in the Kingkiller Chronicles so far have like 4.5 stars on Goodreads, and each of them have, I think, over 100,000 ratings. Like, I don't care how much stock I put in other reviewers. When I see that in a book, and especially in 2 books by the same author in the same series, that makes me go, whoa, that book must be really amazing. Another fairly big book turn-on for me is when I see that a book is more than 500 pages long. I have said many times that I really love big books, and I feel like the more time I spend with characters, the more I care about them, And so when I see that a book is 500 pages or more, it makes me want to read it more than I did beforehand. That doesn't necessarily mean that any book that I see that's over 500 pages is something I want to read. But if a book that I want to read is 500 pages or more, it just makes me that much more interested in reading it. Another slightly random book turn on for me is if it is recommended by Jeff from Ermagerd Books. Even though Jeff reads mostly like adult fantasy and I only sometimes read adult fantasy, whenever there is an adult fantasy or a sci-fi or honestly pretty much any book that Jeff recommends, it makes me want to pick it up because we tend to have similar opinions on the books that we read. And while there are definitely some YA books that I really like because I do like romance more than he does, if he recommends a book, there's a really high chance that I will like it as well. And so whenever there's a book that he just absolutely loves and really recommends, it makes me want to pick it up. The False Prince is one example of this, and although I didn't love it quite as much as he did, it was definitely a book that I really enjoyed, and the rest of the trilogy was amazing. So definitely a great recommendation from Jeff, and if you haven't read this trilogy, you should check it out. And of course, one of his favorite books of all time, The Name of the Wind, which was amazing. Just so good. Like, if you haven't read this book and you like fantasy, read it. Another fairly big book turn on for me is when there are alternate worlds in a book. I mean, I guess this also kind of ties into the fact that I really like world building, and so when I get to learn about several different worlds within one single book, it just makes me really excited. For example, the Pendragon series, which is one of my favorite series of all time, has several different alternate universes, which are called territories in the series. But my favorite part of the series, or at least one of my favorite parts of the series, is learning about each and every new territory that the main character Bobby visits and like figuring out what it's all about. And it's just, yeah, I love alternate worlds because I love world building. And my final book turn on is a little bit more like ambiguous, and that is unique concepts. Like when I hear a concept of a book, and I personally find it to be a really, really unique concept, it makes me that much more interested in picking it up. One author who I always think about when I think of unique concepts for books is Jay Asher, who has written both this book, 13 Reasons Why, as well as another book which is called The Future of Us. For each of these books, I wanted to pick them up so badly because of their really unique concepts. 13 Reasons Why is about a girl who commits suicide and sends out tapes to the 13 people that she says are the reason that she committed suicide. And we get to see from the point of view from one of the characters who receives the tapes. And his second book, The Future of Us, which is co-written with Carolyn Mackler, is about two teenagers in, I think, 1995 who accidentally stumble across Facebook in 2011, and they see the future of their lives. One of these ended up really well, which was 13 Reasons Why, and it is now one of my absolute favorite books. However, The Future of Us, I wasn't a huge fan of. I wasn't really a big fan of how it was executed, even though I really did love the concept. So even though this doesn't always end up perfect for me, it does make me really want to read a book when I hear that it has a really unique concept. Okay, so now we're going to be moving into my book turn-offs, and a couple of these require a little bit of explanation, so bear with me. My first book turn-off is that the characters in the book are actually in high school. This is possibly like some subconscious reason that I tend to gravitate toward dystopian and fantasy books. Because I feel like whenever there are characters in a book who attend a normal high school, I have to deal with like really annoying, obnoxious, arrogant characters, and I just don't want to deal with that. Maybe it's just because I am not in high school anymore and I kind of find some of the cool kid routine in high school to be really annoying and just dumb, but I just tend to not like characters that are still in high school because they're so immature and I can't relate to them. Now, this isn't to say that like every book that I've ever read with high school students is annoying and I hated all the characters, but I find that often characters in high school, in normal high schools, tend to annoy me because they tend to be written as very arrogant and full of themselves. And I just don't like those types of characters. Another random book turnoff for me is when the cover is like poorly or cheaply made or looks like really cheesy. I mean, I know we've all seen these types of covers, and I'll try to like put some up here to like as an example of what I mean. But like when I see a cover that just I personally think looks really dumb or really cheesy, it pushes me away from reading it. And I know that the cover has like no effect on the book's quality, but for some reason, whenever I see a cover that I think looks cheesy or looks cheap or dumb, it turns me off from the book. And if it doesn't completely turn me off from the book, it definitely does give me a negative opinion of it before I've even started it, which is totally not fair to a book that could actually be really good. Another book turnoff for me is when a book is solely historical fiction or romance. Because, like I've said in the past, I'm a big fan of like fantasy, dystopian, science fiction, all sorts of crazy stuff that can't happen in the real world. And if a book is just historical fiction or just romance or just a combination of the two, and it has like no fantastical or science fiction-y elements to it, it's not interesting to me. I don't want to read it. For example, The Diviners by Libba Bray was a book that I really loved, but if it hadn't had that paranormal element to it, I wouldn't have even wanted to pick it up. Another of my book turn-offs is kind of the other end of one of my book turn-ons, which is if a book has 3.5 stars or less on Goodreads. And I know that this is a really small window that I've put myself in, like 4 and over is like really great, but 3.5 and under is not, and I only have that small window. But I mean, it is an average of people's feelings, and if an average of people's feelings for a book are lower than 3.5 stars, then I tend to already have a negative opinion of it going into it. I tend to be a little bit more critical of a reviewer, and if the general public who has reviewed it on Goodreads gives it less than 3.5 stars, I mean, when I'm gonna probably be more critical than that, what's the point? And finally, my last book turnoff is books that are 300 pages or less. I'm not saying that a book that is 300 pages or less cannot be good, but as I've said earlier in this video and also in other videos, I tend to prefer long books, and it takes me a long book or a series to actually care about the characters within that book or series. And if I have 300 pages or less to start caring about the characters or the plot, it's honestly probably not going to happen. There are definitely cases that contradict this, such as The Perks of Being a Wallflower, or I think The Fault in Our Stars is also less than 300 pages, as well as 13 Reasons Why, but these are definitely anomalies for me, because if I don't have sufficient pages or enough time to start caring about characters and plot and world, then it's not going to happen. So if there's a book that I really want to read and I hear that it's less than 300 pages long, it turns me off a little bit. That doesn't mean I'm not going to read it, but it does make me a little bit more cautious going into it because I'm not sure I'm going to like it as much as I would if it was like 200 pages longer. So yeah, that is about it for my book turn-ons and turn-offs. Let me know down in the comments what some of yours are, because I feel like I have some fairly common ones as well as some kind of random ones. So yeah, let me know down in the comments. As always, I will leave a link down in the description to my blog and to my Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!